Hey, it's Jordan, and we are in the post-apocalyptic period after the Mueller report, and Attorney General Barr just released a short synopsis. So I'm with Matt Taibbi of Rolling Stone, and also you reported in Russia in the 1990s. So you were one of the first people I
And
wanted.
beyond.
Yes, yeah. So you were one of the first people I wanted to speak to because, gosh, what a novel concept having somebody who understands Russia to talk to. So before we get into any of this, I'll just ask you. I assume you agree with me. The report should be released so we could see how they came to these conclusions.
Of course, yeah. And I'm sure it's going to be full of all sorts of stuff that is not going to be flattering to the president. I think, well, I can't be sure of that, but that's my guess. But I think, I think in the interest of disclosure, it should be released. Having said that, there was a lot of criticism for James Comey in the summer of 2016 when he declined to prosecute Hillary Clinton, but he did so in this way where he tried to have it both ways, both criticizing her very harshly, but also declining to prosecute. The system is sort of designed to not allow the criminal justice system to be political actors in that way. They either prosecute or they don't. And so even though I do think the report should be released, I'm not a huge fan of that becoming a thing going forward.
Right. And this is just a synopsis, so obviously there could be more in it that's not so great for Trump, his campaign. But I mean, reading the synopsis on collusion, there's not much to say other than he was pretty straightforward that he didn't have any evidence to support that.
Yeah, I mean the headline quote, and I have it here, is deadly. I mean, the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. That was a really significant quote. Then there was another portion that I thought hasn't gotten a lot of play yet, but I thought was really interesting, where they talked about, sort of why they punted on the obstruction issue, because they didn't make a finding of fact on whether or not he committed obstruction of justice. But it also, there's a sentence in there that's to the effect of, we took into account the president's attitude towards obstruction given the absence of evidence on the collusion front. So that tells you a little bit about the thinking of the Mueller investigation when it came to obstruction as well. So this is a pretty damning document for people who have been holding out hopes that this would be this presidency wrecking report.
Right. And there was one line I thought was interesting where says, but as noted above, the special counsel did not find that the Trump campaign or anyone associated with it conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in these efforts, despite multiple offers from Russian-affiliated individuals to assist the Trump campaign. So I'm not defending Trump, but it would come off to me that they had offers to coordinate, collaborate, whatever Cold War adjective you'd like to put in.
Yeah, but there's a word for that. But
right.
I don't know
But basically, either just because they were too busy on the campaign trail or they just didn't take it seriously, they rebuffed it, which would be the polar opposite of a sinister collaboration.
Right, and you could chalk that up to incompetence as much as anything else, but I think that's an area where I'd like to see what the report says, because clearly they did a lot of research and they went down a lot of alleys in search of what these contacts were. Remember, the original mandate of the special counsel was oddly limited, and it sort of mandated that they look for, among other things, just links to, which is an odd thing to ask a prosecutor to do. Like, links aren't against the law, but they were charged to do that. But they, I'm sure, went after all kinds of links, and it'll be interesting to find out exactly what that amounted to. What kind of offers there had been, whether they were just misunderstood, whether they were rejected. Clearly, they didn't find any evidence that it actually ever progressed to a point where anything even remotely prosecutable took place.
Right. And I want to ask you how you read this statement. The special counsel states that while this report does not conclude that the president committed a crime, it also does not exonerate him. I read it to get back to where we start, where, okay, there were untoward things going on, and he's kind of a sleazeball in how he acted and calling in speeches. WikiLeaks can get the emails, this and that, but. So that's how I read it, what he's talking about. He's not exonerated or innocent. Do you read that differently?
I read it a little differently because the way that prosecutors look at things is a little different. You're never innocent in the eyes of the law until your case has been dismissed with prejudice or you've been acquitted. Mm-hmm. So, and even then, you're only innocent of that particular charge. So you are innocent until proven guilty. But the purpose of the criminal justice system is not to exonerate people. The purpose of the criminal justice system is to make a decision about whether or not to indict. And here they clearly made a decision about that. They've certainly referred cases to other places, and they've shown in their behavior that they take it very seriously. That they're putting people in jail for things that normally don't command jail time, like making a misstatement to investigators. But these kinds of reports normally don't come with we fully exonerate X or Y. At least I don't think that's normally the approach.
Right. So essentially, until we see the report, there's not much to get into regarding the report. Like we talked about, is pretty straightforward what they found and did not find. So I'd like to get into the media because, we've been seeing for basically 3 years now that anyone who exercised critical thinking, if that critical thinking is not fire-breathing, Trump Trump is working with the Kremlin and all this, you have been painted as a secret Kremlin agent, so have I, and many others in our field of work. So you wrote a great piece. I haven't read the whole thing, but I read most of it, where you're basically saying that this, obviously we're not comparing it to the loss of thousands of people's lives, but the journalistic process is very similar, or the lack of journalistic process, with Russiagate that it was in the build-up to the Iraq War. Can you kind of talk about why this is going to leave a real stain on an already pretty stained mainstream media establishment?
Yeah, I mean there are lots of things to look at here, but just to get back, let's first address the whole issue of consequence, because I had a lot of blowback from people saying, how can you possibly compare the two things? One of them led to hundreds of thousands of people dying, and then we had a permanent presence in the Middle East. But this caper has not played itself out completely, and even though the whole idea of Trump and collusion has fallen by the wayside, there's a whole range of secondary things that were set into motion by this story that are not even close to having reached their conclusion, like the whole idea of tightened internet censorship, or a more aggressive foreign policy posture towards Russia, or more enhanced surveillance of internet activity, who your associations were, the policing of political advertising. I think there's lots of things that we don't know how this is going to work out yet. We do know that they've created lots of different sort of new bodies to look at preventing things that they associated with the Russia crisis, both here and in Britain. You hear about things like the Integrity Initiative, right, which are designed to combat Russian influence operations and all that. So all of that's one thing. But
also to add, I mean, pulling out of the INF treaty recently also.
Oh, yeah, of course. All of that stuff makes the world dramatically more unsafe, and we're in a couple of places in the world now. Russian American troops are within a heartbeat of each other, and tensions are, the doomsday clock that was started in the 50s by the Federation of Atomic Scientists. It's never been closer to midnight than it is now. We're in a dangerous place in the world. But in terms of the media, the difference between this incident and the WMD incident was the entire spectrum of sort of non-conservative news media not only bought this story, but they completely rejected any dispositive information. It was impossible. There were a few voices like you and me and Aaron Mate and Glenn Greenwald who became a villain, like, you know, not just not listened to, but his very name became an insult online, really over this story.
I remember New York Magazine did a profile piece on him, which was basically portraying him as kind of a Russian stooge.
Yeah, exactly. The New Yorker did one, the bane of their resistance, right? And they portrayed him as a sort of Emmanuel Goldstein character, right, who was up to God knows what. And this scared a lot of reporters. I don't know about you, but I had a lot of colleagues who kind of whispered to me in private about, yeah, I don't know if I want to say anything about this, right? Because everybody saw what happened to people who stuck their noses out about this. There weren't many of us, but, you know, not many of us had our careers go well. You know,
and there's kind of I mean, I was ostracized for different reasons, which is a whole different subject. But there was kind of this ostracizing where, you know, if you're trying to get freelance gigs with certain outlets or whatever the case may be, well, you're one of these kooky Russiagate or Russia conspiracy theorists. Like, us questioning it was the conspiracy theory because it's just fact that this has legs.
Right. Yeah. No. Exactly. And that was what was so weird about it, because my take on it, you know, from the start was really super conservative. I mean that was the odd thing about it. Like I tried to take the position of, well, yeah, I mean, like there are facts in the story that look bad, but you know, we have a bad experience in the past with getting over our skis with a certain kind of story, right? And those stories are the ones that are fueled by unnamed official sources from the security services, and especially ones that involve private, unconfirmed opposition research. That's a very toxic combination. It's the kind of story that you always want to be a little bit careful about. And so, you know, really the extent of my criticism from the beginning was just, you know, we should sort of be reluctant to make sweeping declarations about the meaning of this until we know exactly what it is. And incidentally, we still don't know, right? Like there are huge unknowns about this story even now. Like, how did it start? Does anybody know the answer to that question? Do you know? Like there were multiple theories that were posited in the press over the years about, you know, why the FBI started investigating. You know, first they told us it was because of Carter Page. Then they told us it was because of Papadopoulos. Then it turned out it was because Robert Hannigan of the GCHQ in Britain briefed John Brennan, who in turn briefed the FBI. Like, what's the real story? Like, you know, so reporters always need to sort of have the whole lay of the land before they really plant their feet and start talking about things, and we just never did that with this story. And any suggestion that we should do that was met with immediate condemnation in a way that was unprecedented, I thought.
Well, what was also interesting, and I actually said this when I was still at the Young Turks, there was this notion, and I mean, I don't think I need to explain for you, but I definitely don't like Trump. I think I think he should be taken out in an election.
Right.
If there was something that was credible to impeach him, fine, but I don't see that yet. But, well, emoluments clause, but that's separate too. So they kept saying that Trump is working for Putin and he's a Putin stooge, but like he armed the Ukrainian rebels and he bombed Syria, and there was just a lot of things. I mean, right now he's trying to execute a coup in Venezuela, which Russia certainly doesn't want. So there were many things that Trump was trying to do that it didn't make sense to me. If Russia has something on Trump or his campaign or what have you, he wasn't operating in a way that was 100% kowtowing to Russia. He was operating in a way, in terms of the verbal pleasantries to Putin, that to me made it seem like, well, he's still making money off of his real estate deals, that it's public knowledge that a lot of those deals are with Russian oligarchs, so maybe it is he's flattering somebody who's tied to his business. What are your thoughts on that this continued to be said when there was always things out there that showed, well, he was doing things that aren't in Russia's best interests?
Yeah, that was an amazing part of the story for me too. I mean, one of the things I started doing early on in the process, because so many of the Russia-based stories started to like fall apart, you know, days or weeks after they first came out. So I said in another forum that it was a little bit like fruit flies. They were designed to have short lives. You know, they kind of went out into the world. There were a few headlines, then they disappeared after a few days. And so I started to do this sort of for my own curiosity. I was going over the reporting of a lot of these Trump reports, and for instance, the assertion that was made constantly that he intervened at the Republican National Convention to create a pro-Russian agenda that would downplay assistance to Ukraine. I went through. I talked to the woman who proposed that amendment, who was a kindly 84-year-old lady who thought the Ukrainians were like the Contras and we should have given the Contras guns. I talked to all the people in the committee. They all said the same thing. They all said it would have failed anyway, even without Trump, right? So that part of the story was left out. But then you look at the end result of what was in the Republican platform, and it was by degrees tougher on Russia than the Democratic platform. It's still, yes, it took out a portion that said about lethal defensive weapons to Ukraine, but it also said, it talked about rendering appropriate assistance to the Ukrainian armed forces. It talked about sanctions. None of this stuff was in the Democratic platform. So, you know, it's impossible that all the reporters covering this didn't notice this. So that's when I started to think something's not right about this story. Like it just, you know, your spider sense goes off about these things after a while, doesn't it? You know what I mean? Like you just start to feel like something's off. And I think they were misrepresenting Putin, obviously, I mean, Trump, for a variety of reasons that are just ridiculous and have to do with his personality. He likes Vladimir Putin. Putin is the kind of tough guy that Trump isn't in real life. And I think he's jealous of him, frankly. But policy-wise, no, I mean, no, it doesn't. That part of the story doesn't really add up, does it? I don't know. I still, to this day, think it's a weak case.
Right. And I think another interesting element, and a lot of this gets to just like the psychology of the Twitter media culture, and it was basically I was attacked, you were attacked, a lot of people were attacked for, quote, whataboutism. So when you point out, all right, yeah, Putin's not a great guy, but why is he the new, like, you know, terror to humanity when we're still, like, hanging out with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman? We're supporting, you know, this genocide in Yemen. Obviously, I mean, we created bin Laden and al-Qaeda. So there was all this whataboutism. I remember just pointing out, like, listen, I think Putin's terrible, but I don't understand why we're poking the bear of a nuclear power when we're totally fine with equally reprehensible people. But I was attacked, you were attacked, all these people pointing this out were attacked as whataboutism or supporting Trump. And there was just this derangement culture that began, also then becoming more of a McCarthyite culture. I remember Ro Khanna like retweeted Rania Khalek and was shamed on Twitter, a sitting United congressman, for daring to retweet basically a journalist who's anti-war. So can you kind of talk about, I think there was really a McCarthyite vibe that developed by actual reporters based in New York and D.C.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it became, look, I lived in Russia throughout the 90s and the early 2000s. I was there in 1996 and 1995 when the United States openly meddled in the Russian election. It was not a secret. American advisors had an office in the Kremlin. Our advisors were making commercials for Boris Yeltsin. We were helping put together deals that led to enormous amounts of fundraising going to Yeltsin to help, because he was at 7% in the polls in the beginning of the election. He was going to lose. And when he did win, he had this come from behind victory after we helped sort of reorganize the economy and create the oligarch class. There's a whole long backstory here. But basically, a lot of money was taken out of the population, thrown towards Yeltsin's re-election campaign. And when it was done, there's a cover story that you can see in Time magazine. I think it's July 16th, 1996. It says "Yanks to the rescue." And it's a picture. It's a picture of Boris Yeltsin. We gloated about this, right? So what does that mean? Is that whataboutism? Well, no. It's context. It's it's what we do in journalism. We say how important is this story really? We know what Russia did. The Facebook buys. Certainly the idea that they would leak the DNC memos in a way that might trace back to them represented an escalation of sorts. But compared to the way that we intervene in countries around the world, how serious is it? Is it something that we should be completely losing our minds over? Like, I don't know, right? I think we should talk about it. But the problem is exactly what you mentioned, is that it became taboo to bring up anything that kind of upset this train that was developed, that started to develop about this story. And yeah, you're right. It was driven almost entirely by Northeast Corridor pundits, people who live in Washington, New York, and LA. And they were the ones who were the most aggressive in doing the shaming business, which was, I think we're going to have to look at. I think this was an amazing period in American history.
And I want to ask you, obviously this is just opinion. You're not sitting in meetings at MSNBC. But the bottom line is, MSNBC, which was languishing for many years in the ratings, and cable news, which is in general altogether languishing in the ratings before Trump and before he went down that escalator. MSNBC in this Trump presidency, and once they started pushing more than anyone, even more than CNN, Russiagate, their ratings are through the roof. And Rachel Maddow, who in some instances, I couldn't tell the difference between her and like Glenn Beck red phone days.
Totally.
Do you think, again, opinion, you can't get in their minds, but was this just kind of like hey, the ratings are up, let's stay on this, even if it's, kind of, we're lacking context and we're just mass speculating every night? Rachel Maddow, for God's sakes, during the polar vortex, did a segment saying that Russia might be able to just hack our electricity grid during the polar vortex.
Yeah, and freeze old people and kids to death and stuff like that, right? Rachel, I've known Rachel going back to the Air America days. I knew and liked her. She used to be, really funny and worldly in a really interesting way. And during this period, she started playing this character on television that was kind of like the Madame Defarge of this movement. People tuned in nightly to find, who the next villain on deck to be examined was, right? And you could almost see the machinations behind the scene, and this went hand in hand, as you said, with exploding profits. MSNBC, I think in the first year after Trump was elected, saw a 62% bounce in its ratings, unprecedented, right? Because normally the ratings after an election go the other way for cable stations. So it was the ideal press story because, unlike normal press stories, this was one that you had to keep checking every minute, because any minute now, and they kept creating this expectation that, you see those mashups with the walls are closing in, right? Mm-hmm. That was the language they used, because they wanted to create the impression in viewers that any minute now Trump could be let out of with the White House in manacles, which of course legally for a variety of reasons wasn't true. And of course the underlying story wasn't true either, but it was great TV, but it was totally irresponsible from a journalistic point of view. And I think they got caught up in the finances of it. I think they got caught up in the reaction from the viewers. I don't know. What do you think? Because I think there are a variety of temptations that come into play here, and it's tough to know.
Well, I also think, going back to what you said about reporters who would kind of like off the record being like, I don't know, I think this is kind of going too far, but they were kind of following their orders. I also think there was also a real desire. It's like when you don't want to address one thing, which is like, wow, how did this man win? You know,
Right.
what is this growing anti-establishment outcry about? Well, you know, people suddenly care about money in politics, and like young people want, you know, when you as a corporate media, which is mostly, you know, I mean, it's kind of like the financial industry. It's well-to-do people working at these outlets. I mean, the lowest level production assistant makes more than many people in the middle of the country. When you're working in these corporate outlets, like they don't want to do a deep dive into like, wow, the political winds are changing, and you know, there's millions of people who like this, you know, older guy Bernie Sanders, and you know, Hillary Clinton. The Clinton dynasty was just taken down. I mean, you could have covered the reasons into that, and you know, the domino effect into other areas for 2 years, really. So if you don't want to cover those things because it's not really sexy and it doesn't match your business model, a Cold War reenactment, especially with older viewers, the cable audience is a little older, could really stoke up what you were talking about: fear, anger, and hysteria.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Among other things, because they had to deal with the shock that that their viewers naturally felt from being unprepared for the possibility of a Trump win. I mean, I saw this very graphically because I had to cover the campaign on the road, and I saw there were basically two major deceptions, two big screw-ups, and these themselves are also sort of WMD caliber screw-ups. The first one was that Trump could never possibly win the nomination. And you saw this continue very late. It started in the summer of 2015 with people like Nate Silver at 538.com who said, you know, that Trump would have a better shot at playing in the NBA or being in a Home Alone remake than he would at being the nominee. You know, Bloomberg said that you know, it could never possibly happen. Dana Milbank said he'd eat his column if Trump became the nominee. Universally, it was said that Trump had zero chance. Meanwhile, he was leading in the polls, right? And so, you know, I thought that was weird. And it had a lot to do with what you're talking about. The reporters just were not in tune with what was going on with the voters. The voters were in a very different place than they had been even 4 years before. Like, all of a sudden, when you went to talk to people on the road, the first thing out of their mouths was, I will vote for anybody who's not a politician. Like, I don't care. You could pull somebody out of the rec center and I'll vote for that person over any politician, right? And this was true on the Democratic side, too, with Bernie Sanders. Like, that drove his campaign, too. So Trump wins the nomination. That's a huge shock because they've unprepared their readers for that. Then throughout the entire general election season, what were the stories? They all said historic landslide on the way, right? Like, the only suspense was whether Trump would lose by 5 points or 30, right? Nobody even considered the possibility that he would win. And I was part of that. I screwed that up, too. I let a pollster talk me into that. But they went straight from those two deceptions to Trump winning, and instead of trying to examine the root causes, they went straight to Russia. So it was like an unbroken series of screw-ups, like one piling into the other. Does that make sense? I mean, I think
it was also what was the book? Shattered. About Hillary Clinton's campaign. I mean, basically, right after they lost Hillary Clinton's campaign, the brain trust was putting together this kind of as how they were going to spin things. And a lot of people from Hillary Clinton's campaign has themselves profited off of this by getting MSNBC or CNN gigs and you know, those kinds of things. So this isn't to dance on Hillary Clinton's political grave, but yeah, it was from the political lens where the Clinton machine was kind of trying to, you know, dress up this defeat, and then the media picked that up too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think some of that had to do with the myopia of the Democratic Party establishment, because they just weren't ready to face the reality of the unpopularity of the system. I mean, it was also true in the Republican side. It was It was worse, if anything, on the Republican side. They had no clue. I mean, they gave $150 million to George Bush, who got 3 delegates. So $50 million in delegates tells you that they were, like, you know, just like, what's the baseball movie? Just a bit outside, right?
Yeah.
Like, they missed by a little bit. But on the Democratic side, they saw the Bernie Sanders thing as this, like, weird weather event. They didn't think it was real. Like, they didn't think it was grounded in anything that meant anything. They thought it had something to do with Bernie's hair or his personality. No, this was all of a sudden the politics of Dennis Kucinich, you know, this sort of pacifist, you know, more socially oriented politics, less corporate oriented. All of a sudden, in a heartbeat, it resonated with people because they were sick of something. And they were sick of it across the spectrum. And it didn't take a genius to see it, did it? I mean, you travel the country all the time. You hear this, right?
Well, this was my frustration. And, you know, right now I'm trying to get funding to cover the campaign. But really, when I was on the road, and I saw you on the campaign trail in 2016, it was always amazing to me because I would be out into the crowd before rallies, after rallies. Part of that was I wasn't traveling with the campaigns directly. We were traveling kind of independently. And all the rest of the press would be on the stage.
Can I interrupt you on that? Because that's an important point. Why is that? Because it's expensive, right?
Yes, right. We didn't have the money.
And it costs like $3,500–4,000 a day to travel with campaigns, so you don't get no independent reporters covering the campaign. They have to drive themselves, which is a mess. Anyway, go ahead. Yeah.
But I'd actually argue you're more equipped to actually get the pulse of the voters by not traveling with the campaign, because you're just following the candidate. Yeah, the campaign will give you little, you know, nuggets and exclusives for you to break, but you're not going to get a pulse of the voters. You show up to rallies with the candidate 10 minutes before. You're not going to get a chance to talk to people. And frankly, even if they had the chance, I'm not sure they would. But the point I'm trying to make is I would get the kind of pulse, and I always said to people, he did not win Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania for any. Russia wasn't even on the top 10 list. It was NAFTA. He had them at NAFTA. They were like, and I don't blame a lot of these people. You know, there was racism, sure. There was anti-immigrant fervor, yes. But there also was, especially in Michigan and Ohio, when he was talking about NAFTA, this is something that these folks have been screaming out into a cave for years, and D.C. was not listening to them. The fact that their jobs were offshored with no kind of backup plan for the displaced. It's the same thing with Amazon. I just got back from Seattle covering it. Amazon comes in, yeah, you get great jobs and skyscrapers and all these things, and then the rent goes up 70% in 5 years, and half the city is poor now and homeless. So I feel, I don't know your thoughts, but I don't know if reporters are basically programmed to not see what's going on because they're not out there, or again, if it was that profit motive of like, well, this story sells better.
Well, no, I think they were afraid to get into some taboo areas, right? Like,
or they're not allowed to by their editors,
or they're not allowed to. I don't know how it works because I've never been in that situation, but Trump was a really interesting phenomenon because he doesn't really work off a script. He'd go into a hall and almost like a comedian, he kind of feels out the audience, you know? He'll try out a line or two, and depending on what the reaction is, he may try another line in the next speech. And I started to notice in the fall of 2016 that he was talking more and more about the uselessness of American wars overseas. They cost too much. Why aren't our NATO partners kicking in more? It's a bad deal for us. You know, there was a very significant line that he didn't really start until early 2016, but he would say, you know, we build all this stuff in Iraq, but we can't even build a school in Brooklyn, right? This stuff was working with audiences, like you could see it, and he could feel it too. And you know, I thought to myself, well, I don't believe him. You know what I mean? Like, I don't believe he's going to fix it. But he's putting his finger on something that's out there in the zeitgeist. You know what I'm saying? And it was a shock to see that reporters didn't write home about this. That he was tapping into something that was out there and that was legitimate. You know, forget about whether the vessel was the appropriate vessel or not. and people were just in denial about it. I think they still are, right? Because we've wasted all this time talking about Russia. That's the thing that's so crazy about it, right?
And not to waste our time playing pundit, but honestly, I mean, does this not help Trump wildly? Does this not help him? What maybe he'll increase his lies by, instead of five a sentence, now we could do it 20 a sentence, and this is just the total shield. He basically, the deep state, the media, they come after me. You can't trust anything they say. Look at the Mueller report.
He can just do needle downs between now and 2020. He doesn't have to run a play from here on in. All he's got to do is make sure that there's no market correction and that we don't get into a hideous foreign policy crisis. And he's got the mother of all campaign issues to run against. He can say the news media tried to take me out in an unofficial coup, and they failed their own harebrained scheme to delegitimize my presidency, which he will pitch, and he won't be wrong about this, which he will pitch as they did not respect your decision, to make me president. That is gonna work when he goes out in the campaign trail, and the polls show. I wrote about this. 50.3% of America now believes that the Mueller thing was a witch hunt, and that was before today's news.
Right.
So, where's it going to be? Unless there's something like mind blowing in the report that we haven't seen yet. Mm-hmm. I don't know how this isn't a big issue for him.
I'd like to ask you, there's a lot of Democrats who, many years ago, the same Democrats calling Julian Assange Lucifer and WikiLeaks awful, loved WikiLeaks. And Julian Assange has obviously been holed up in an embassy long before Russiagate became a thing. But there's no more sealed indictments. There's no unsealed indictments. Obviously, there's the separate sealed indictment that is on Assange that predates 2016, so it's not related to this. So
it's Chelsea Manning story thing.
Right. So if there's nothing left as far as indictments, one would have to say they don't have proof that WikiLeaks collaborated with Trump or anything like that. So then it gets down to the narrative that Russia was WikiLeaks' source. Obviously, you could think whatever you want about WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, but I personally think Julian Assange and WikiLeaks has been really portrayed as the evil villain in this, when, nothing they released was false. They have a 100% accuracy record. I haven't seen, I don't know what your thoughts, and I'm willing to be wrong, but I haven't seen any smoking gun evidence that their direct source was Russian operatives. What are your thoughts on that? Because, he's basically being tortured psychologically and physically in an embassy today.
Look, I'm going to break a little news on your segment here. I've been working on a story. I haven't done it. But one of the reasons that that my alarm bells went off about the Mueller probe is when I found out that Mueller had made no attempt to take a statement from anybody at WikiLeaks or from Assange at any point in this inquiry. They never reached out, no American official. There was at one point a brief effort by a congressional inquiry to talk about interviewing Assange, but when he asked about whether there would be immunity, and he didn't even demand it, he just asked the question, they didn't get back to him about that. But Mueller, despite the fact that Assange is clearly a player in the overall theory of some of his cases, particularly the Roger Stone case, he never attempted to try to nail down exactly what happened there. And, as an investigator, whether you think the person is going to tell you the truth or not, you would want to get that story on the record, right? Wouldn't you?
Absolutely. He was trying to get an interview with the president pretty much. He worked hard to try to get Trump to meet with him, and obviously he failed. But why wouldn't you do the same thing with Julian Assange?
Exactly. And Julian Assange probably would have given that interview, and he may have had lots to say. He might have had, who knows? I don't think Julian Assange has particularly warm feelings towards Roger Stone or any of those idiots. It might have even helped him make some of those cases. Who knows? But why not do what you would normally do if you were actually engaged in a real search for the truth, right? And to me, their failure to try to even sound out what happened there suggests to me that they were never really interested in getting a full picture of that crucial kind of timeline. Like the story is that Russia hacked the DNC through whatever hook and crook, through the phishing scheme. Guccifer then, through some kind of middleman, gets it to Assange, who in turn leaks it out into the world, which affects the election. That all this is like a conspiracy. It's been thought out. All the different parts understand what they're doing together, but it's not. It hasn't been established, right? Like, and again, and I'm like you. I don't disbelieve it. I think Julian Assange probably has enough negative feelings about Hillary Clinton and about the United States government that, he would probably be capable of doing that. I mean, he's an iconoclastic personality, but what they're doing with him is something that I think that's the next step in this process is to try to change attitudes about what happened there, and also to get people to realize the dangers of what's going on here. With the case that they do have against Assange, they're attempting to try to define normal journalistic procedure as espionage, which is like dangerous beyond belief. I mean, this is what I'm talking about the authoritarian movement that this thing has launched. People just do not recognize the significance of what that kind of a case could mean. And yeah, you're absolutely right.
And I mean, nobody's ever posited his source might very well not be Russia, but that source got it from Russian operatives. I mean, sometimes your source. I mean, you could get you could get documents that are government documents or campaign documents from one source, but they got it from this person who got it from this person. I mean, it's not always a straight line in my experience. I don't know about you, but I just wanted to bring up Assange because I think that, listen, is he a perfect person? Could you look at certain things? Of course. But I think they have been wrongly vilified. And I think the same people like Rachel Maddow, who loved WikiLeaks many years ago, when MSNBC was still like lean forwarding and like, a little bit more sane, now he's an evil man. I want to end.
Can I just about that quickly?
Sure.
It drives me crazy because the Assange situation speaks so much to what will happen to ordinary journalists. It's astonishing to me that reporters don't recognize that they should be massively invested in what happens to Assange. And also the whole notion that he is a Russian state actor, there's no pushback at all to that idea in the press these days, whereas nothing about this guy's personality in the past suggests that he's ever wanted to get into bed with any country, except for like a relationship of convenience temporarily, right? So I think that's a total misread of what happened there. It may very well have come from Russia, but I just think I'd like to see that story fleshed out a lot more.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you from a kind of more of a personal journalistic lens. What's always interesting to me is when the corporate media, and I'm being honest, to be honest with you, there were some mainstream independent outlets that hooked onto this as well. I mean, I said this when I was at the Young Turks. I publicly said I thought they were kind of speculating and getting a little too involved with this. But like we've seen with WMD and many other reporting errors, there never seems to be any reckoning. There never seems to be. I'm not calling for people to be fired, but a little humility sometimes goes a long way. A little introspection, even on air, saying, in the future, do we need to do things different? Because there's nothing wrong with investigative reporters, if there are those anymore, looking into and trying to find out what happened. But the on-air speculation that permeated so many segments after segment after segment, at the expense of reporting on critical issues that you and I cover all the time, I know the answer, but will there be any introspection or reckoning or anything? Because I don't see Rachel Maddow. Joy Reid has already said, this reeks of a conspiracy.
I mean, of course there's not going to be a reckoning. Of course there won't be. There never is. I tried to make this point last week that the people who were, the most complicit in the WMD affair almost universally either kept their jobs or failed upward. Many of them won awards for stories that later turned out to be deeply problematic. Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor of The Atlantic, won a couple of awards. He won an Overseas Press Club award and an Ellie, a National Magazine award, which now just says that he won it for coverage of Islamic terrorism, is what it says. But no, I mean, I think they need to rethink not just what happened here, but the business model, right? Which has become so starkly politicized that what happened here is people could not separate the idea of publishing news that was dispositive to the collusion theory and being pro-Trump, right? Whereas all the power that the press has is derived from the idea that we're separate from all that, right? Like we're not on anybody's team. Like if you want us to say something, you got to convince us. And you gotta do it every single day. We're not gonna just do it because we like you, right? Like that's where we get our power from. You got to make a case to us. And what happened with Trump was the whole business kind of made this decision to say this is too important for us to start, nitpicking about little things anymore. We got to jump into this with both feet. And the end result of that is that there's going to be no credibility for the business anymore because nobody believes that it's not political. Do you? I mean, like I think it's been deadly for sort of non-alternative media in this period. Yeah.
Right. And as a final plug, actually, I can't think of a better time. You're going to be releasing a book about how terrible the media is.
Yeah.
Pretty soon. Can you tell people about that?
Yeah, it's going to come out in OR Books later this year, but you can also read it serially online at taibbi.substack.com. The piece that I just wrote about Russiagate and how the media behaved in that affair was, I think pretty widely read, and I think there's a lot in there. It took me a while to write it, and I definitely would suggest that people read it. But yeah.
Cool, man. Well, thank you for taking the time on this very eventful day. Rachel Maddow's off tonight, so we'll have to we'll have to wait till Monday to see. Maybe she's channeling Putin and some extraterrestrial life to give us her response. So hopefully the next time we'll be talking about the real collusion with United States politicians and media and Saudi Arabia.
Exactly. That would be better. Jordan, thank you so much, and thanks for sticking to your guns on this all this time.
All right, man. Take care.
All right, take care.
Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.